Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through the worst things that I read and watched in 2023. I'm just gonna jump right into it, and the first one is one that I purged from my mind because it was so bad and I forgot that it came out in 2023, and when I thought about it, I was thinking, no, that had to have come out before, and then I remembered that I started this channel in 2023, and I was like, no, it came out this year because that's when I watched it, so I could talk about it, and that would be Witcher Blood Origin. I personally think that Netflix should have never touched The Witcher. I haven't really enjoyed anything they've done with it. I really was hopeful with the animated movie. I was hoping it'd be a show, but they did an animated movie that was focusing on Vesemir. I didn't really care for that, despite the fact that they had one of the phenomenal voice actors that I really loved from Castlevania. But even that man's wonderful voice wasn't enough to make that show great, that movie great. But it had potential, and the potential just fell flat because it wasn't enough time. If we had elongated it, it would have been better. The Witcher Netflix show, they just don't seem to know, do they want to stay true to the books or do they want to do their own thing? And when they do their own thing, it's never for the benefit of the show, it's always the detriment. Some of the decisions, I actually, for season 2, was enjoying a fair amount of it, and then they made a decision that was so bizarrely stupid that it just derailed the whole feeling between a lot of the characters, the growth between the characters, the relationship building between the characters. I'm like, what are they doing? Why did they add this really bizarre plot as this like arc, this overall arc of season 2? Anyway, so they've had moments where it could have been good, and then just some of the decisions have been so bad that they've brought them down. Witcher Blood Origin, just in its entirety, basically was bad. I do feel bad because I feel like the actors did the best they could. The set location was fine. I mean, I love Iceland, and it was filmed in Iceland. Iceland's gorgeous, hard to go wrong with Iceland. So 2 thumbs up. I really liked where they shot it, and I think some of the shots were good. Some of the music was pretty good, but the editing was wonky. I mean, sometimes you would have conversations happen, and I remember really distinctly there's one where the 2 main characters are talking at a campfire, and they're coming to terms with the fact like, oh, we're gonna have to work together to accomplish our goal. And it's done so quick that it's almost like a YouTube video, where a lot of times YouTubers will cut a lot. They'll cut a lot out of the breaths they take or pauses or things like that. And so it saves you time as a viewer, but then also it's not exactly organic to how people talk most of the time, which is fine. And I think that it can be done for comedic effect also. But regardless, I do not want the high budget things I'm watching to feel like they are edited the same way YouTubers edit their videos. I couldn't believe it because the conversation would happen so fast. It didn't feel like how normal human beings react. It didn't feel like the pacing was there with the conversations. The pacing overall in the show was not well done. This is another one where if they had spent more time with it, I think it could have been better, because the story itself, I feel like there was something compelling in there, and maybe I would have had more emotions had it lasted longer. I feel like some of the villainous characters had moments where you could see the concept of them was cool, or at least interesting, but then it was rushed through, and the whole thing just resulted in coming across very flat. They didn't really do anything very good with this, and it was really unfortunate given that there were a couple of things it had going for it. And I actually, when I saw the trailer, I was like, well, all right, I mean, that actually looks pretty good, even though I haven't liked everything before. And it was potentially the worst thing we've gotten from Netflix in association with Witcher. Not the worst thing ever, it's just the worst thing Witcher related. So Witcher Blood Origin might be, I'm looking at my list, no, there's another thing on this list that I don't think was worse in quality. I just hated it more. But Witcher Blood Origin, not good. After that, this is one where I don't actually think the writing is bad. I don't think the art was bad. It's a manga. It's only 1 volume, and that would be Downfall. It's just that this whole manga's premise is, I think, meant to make you feel very grossed out and to make you feel very uncomfortable. You are following somebody who is a very successful manga artist, writer, and they are just kind of hitting an artistic block. And they also are questioning, do they think their audience actually is intelligent? Do they write for sales or do they write for themselves? And they feel like that those two things can't really come together. And they're so selfish. And they're somebody who has an immense amount of privilege, but they waste that by just going off on these weird, random, just endeavors, I guess you could say. They pursue weird relationships. They are awful to their significant other. They assault their significant other. They're a horrible person. And they constantly are just filled with pity for themselves. And you as the reader are just, like I said before, you're disgusted. You're uncomfortable. And I think it's supposed to... it's up for debate. Is it providing commentary on the way that we idolize artists even when they are potentially these really awful people, but if their art speaks to us, do we forgive? Or is it that we should feel bad for him because of the pressures? I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could pull from it, and there's a lot of different interpretations. I'm choosing to interpret it in the first way I described because I feel like that actually is quite interesting, and the way in which that's dissected is good. But I had to put it on my list of worst just because I can't think of too many other things that made me feel that grossed out reading it. So it's not that I think the quality was bad. It's that I really didn't enjoy my reading experience with that. And hopefully that makes sense. And I suppose I can happily recommend it if you are looking for something that provides commentary on the tortured artists and the way that we feel toward those kinds of people. So I can recommend it, but also just know that you might feel awful picking it up. You're not going to come away from that like, no, it's not Spy Family by any means. After that, we have one where I think the world building is fascinating. The what if is explored in an extraordinary way. You can see it just from that first volume, which is all I read, and I could only read it because I hated the main character so much, and that would be Y: The Last Man. So I liked pretty much everything about this except for the main character. If you don't know, Y: The Last Man is about our own society, but if all men were wiped out, what would happen? And obviously, you would see half the population has been wiped out, so you would see the world come to a grinding halt. And how Brian K. Vaughan chooses to explore that, the political ramifications, the way it affects infrastructure and productivity and healthcare and all these really vital parts of our societies, how all of that is shown, I think is really well done. But the kind of twist to all of this is that there is one man who's still alive, and that would be our main character. And he is so unbearably stupid, which I think makes for an interesting story because it's not like this one guy is going to solve the crisis of there only being one man left alive. And also what happens, the idea of if there is only one man, what happens if he's actually completely useless, I feel like is kind of the vibe, which is funny. And Brian K. Vaughan writes really witty dialogue, really realistic dialogue, so kind of the opposite of Witcher Blood Origin. But I found him so unbearably, mind-numbingly dumb that I'm like, I can't do it. I can't keep going with this series. This main character is just, he's too stupid. And I can take like a stupid but endearing character or a character that's just an absolute cinnamon roll, but maybe they're not like the smartest. I don't mind characters like that. And I don't even mind characters that are maybe not the most intellectually gifted, but they try really hard at things like that. No, that wasn't this guy. Not this guy. It's just like, how can we make him stupid and unlikable? That's how I felt about him anyway. So definitely fell into the worst for me. Not because, similar to Downfall, not because I think the actual story is bad or the art is bad or anything like that. I just couldn't stand that main character. And then last for today, we have a show that I know a lot of people love. This is the first time I'm actually even mentioning this show. My friends really like it. I did not at all. I think this might be one of my least favorite shows I have ever watched, and probably not for the reasons most people dislike the show, and that would be Midnight Mass. This is the first show I have watched by this, I think the writer of the show has done quite a few other things. I know they've done a lot of other things, and this is my first time getting into something of theirs, and I've heard other people say I should definitely still give his other things a shot because they're all fairly different. There's just certain aspects of them that have kind of his signature flair. So I'm not opposed to checking out something else. I also want to make clear that it wasn't the really long monologues that bothered me, because that is something that gets criticized a lot, even by fans of the show. And I also really enjoyed the themes And I actually enjoyed the way it was shot. So there's a lot of things that I liked about it. The themes being the way in which, when we are really caught up in our own beliefs, how we can make anything, no matter how bad it is, we can tell ourselves, oh, it's actually a good thing. And so there's a lot of religious commentary, and that religious commentary was very personal to the writers' experiences growing up, and they felt like they were personal. And you see kind of a lot of debates between the characters about God and religion, and I definitely am for those kinds of things in stories. I like seeing those kinds of things explored. But there was just, I found the show incredibly predictable. I called pretty much everything, so nothing was suspenseful to me. I feel like there were, I don't think the show is the kind of show where plot holes matter because it's more thematically driven. But there were some plot holes, and I don't want to say too much because if you haven't seen the show, then I don't want to give anything away. But there is a being, I'll say, that there's a part of us like, how did we convince this being to get in a box and sail across the ocean? You know, what? And like I said, a lot of the twists I called as soon as they were happening. I'm like, that person is related to that person. That's why they're staring at like I could tell. If you've seen the show, you probably know what I'm referring to. And then I felt so bad for hair and makeup because I understand that some of the characters in the show are starting to look more youthful as the show goes on. But from the very beginning, I'm like, those two actors are like 11 years apart, and one of them's supposed to be the parent and one of them's supposed to be the child. And none of those are big deals, right? Those are all minor things. But it was like minor thing after minor thing stacking up. And the decision making of the characters, I have to go into spoilers for like half a second here. Longer than half a second. I gotta go into spoilers if I'm gonna illustrate my point here, because I know those of you that really like the show are probably like, everything you're talking about is really minute and overall inconsequential. But I'm gonna give an example of poor decision making from one of the characters. So spoilers, if you don't want to see this, you can wait until the spoiler tag is off screen or a timestamp to skip ahead. But Riley, the main character, arguably kind of, when he decides to commit vampire suicide, and I'm like, dude, maybe don't have you and the woman, stranded in the middle of the ocean when you're gonna combust and just turn into a giant fireball. Like, what if you burned your tiny little rowboat and then she's, gotta swim to shore? What a dumb decision. Also, the decision is dumb in general because he's insisting to the girl, oh, you're the only one who's good on this island. Get out of here. You should run. And I'm like, did we forget he has a brother? Why is he not warning his little brother, who's basically a child? What about his little brother? Like, he just doesn't warn anybody else. And I also am like, dude, I get that he wanted to go because he's like, I can't do this. I don't want to hurt someone else. And if me existing depends on hurting other people, I don't want to live that way. I've already lived long enough with the guilt of hurting a person. Like, all of that I understood. But I still feel like he could have just, like, put his hand out into the sun and then shown her without potentially risking her life, too. It was just silly. It was silly. Anyway, I really was more just like, what about his brother? What about the sheriff? That guy's all right. That's one example. That was one example of characters making really ridiculous decisions. And I will say, I didn't dislike the monologues because I actually like a good monologue in a story, whether it's a book or a TV show. However, I didn't like the way in which characters sometimes wouldn't even react to each other's monologues, so it came out very unnatural. There's one where the woman is talking, there's a woman character who's talking about how she believes in God, and here's what I think happens when we die. And I will say, she had just been talking about her abusive childhood, and then she talked about her abusive marriage, and then she was talking about how her, I don't want to say this next thing because it's a spoiler, but she's talking about something really traumatic that just happened to her. And it's really sad. And she was talking about this thing, like, she had so much hope, and she thought her life was going to turn around, and then something bad happened, and how she's like powering through because she believes in heaven, and there being all that. It's like, okay, like, really sad. The guy's just sitting there listening to her and then doesn't respond at all to anything she just said. He just starts going into like, I don't actually think anything. I don't think that there is a heaven. And I'm like, what about, are you going to acknowledge the really, really traumatic, sad thing? Are you going to talk about like the abuse? She is talking about to you and opening up to you about? Are you going to address any of that? No? All right. And so he just launches into this thing about, like, here's what I think happens when we die. And it's this really long monologue where it, like, slowly zooms in on him. And then she starts talking about what she thinks happens, and it slowly zooms in on her. Neither of them really... It doesn't feel like they're talking to each other, really. It just feels like they're talking to you, the audience. And I don't know, that's irritating to me. I just the slow zoom in also. And there's something odd about this movie, or excuse me, this show, where it was like a combination of a horror show and a Hallmark movie. I feel like that scene in particular felt very Hallmark-esque. And then you get these pretty violent moments in the show where you're like, oh, okay, I mean, that was creepy. I will say, though, it was shot beautifully. The acting by some of the actors was phenomenal. Some of those actors were fantastic. And I actually feel like the special effects were done pretty well. And so I was very pleased by all of that. So there had a lot of positives. I just feel like it came down to a lot of little things piling up. It was very, very, very predictable. And the characters just made really, really stupid decisions throughout. Pretty much every character made stupid decisions throughout. So I did not enjoy... Mike Flanagan's the guy's name. I didn't enjoy this, but I do think that I will check out more by Mike Flanagan because the positives were so positive that I could see enjoying something else of his if it had maybe a different plot, and maybe if its storytelling is done in a way that where it feels like the characters are actually interacting with one another. So if you have your own Mike Flanagan recommendations, then let me know, because I am interested in checking out more by them. But anyway, that's it for my worst of the year. I think quality-wise, Witcher Blood Origin was the absolute worst. I think Downfall and Y Last Man, honestly, Midnight Mass also, I feel like it's more just a personal thing. The things that irritated me were the most irritating things while I was engaging with them, where I just didn't want to keep going. But I am very curious, what are some things that were the worst of 2023 for you? It doesn't have to have come out in 2023. Obviously, some of these didn't that I picked up, but I would be very curious to know what didn't work for you. And if you have any feelings on the things I talked about, let me know your thoughts. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.